We just keep the recording. Welcome everyone to the Venture Capital and Equity Investing Fireside Chat that is held in the framework of the GIC Online February 2022 program. We are excited to have two rockstar speakers with us today, Jeffrey Donenfeld and Marvin Dow. So the people I'm happy to know in person, and those people have a lot of things to share when it comes to anything about fundraising, ownership, venture capital, about equity investing, and all this kind of beautiful stuff. So this session is going to be a fireside chat, which means the speakers will be chatting between each other, but they would really want your feedback and input. So be ready to be challenged by them with some questions, and them being curious about your ventures. And this session is for you guys. So the main idea is that we want to provide you value. So, and ideally at some point of time you're going to be fundraising, and use this session to get some hints and tricks on what kind of mistakes to avoid, and how do you approach the investors, etc., and what is the venture capital in general. Okay, so without further ado, I just want to let the guys speak and provide the floor to Jeffrey and Marvin. Jeffrey, to you.
All right, thanks guys. Hello everybody. Glad to be here. Glad we can start this off. And yeah, when you get a moment, we'd love to see you on video so we can all have kind of an interactive thing. Also, Marvin and I would love to answer any of your questions, give you any feedback, and just kind of chat about whatever's on your mind here. We're, like Igor said, this is for you. So feel free to, in Zoom, use the raise your hand thing to raise your hand, and we will be happy to call on you and chat about anything. I'm just going to give you my background, introduce myself, and I'll let Marvin introduce himself, and we'll get into some questions and everything. I'm Jeffrey Donenfeld. I'm investment director at Boomtown Accelerators, currently working on the Comcast Sports Tech program. Boomtown Accelerate is an accelerator company. We run corporate accelerators all over the place. Currently, we work with Comcast, NBC Universal, and run a sports tech accelerator program that is both in person and virtual. We invest in about 10 companies that are proof of concept, commercial stage, almost ready, and get to work with some awesome partners from around the sporting world. I'm just going to put up my background now that has some of our partners on it. There's on the side. In the past, before working with Boomtown, I worked with the U.S. government managing science projects, and then before that, I worked running a digital ad agency in New York City. And I'm really glad to be able to talk with all of you today. Marvin, tell us about yourself.
All right.
What's your background? Where do you come from?
Yeah, and I think probably more important, like, why should we listen to these guys, right?
Yeah,
for the audience.
Great. So I asked that question too.
Yeah, me too. All the time. And so it's nice to meet you. My name is Marvin. I'm based here in San Francisco. And so been in tech now for about 22 years. So I have a little bit of I joke I'm kind of like the Forrest Gump of Silicon Valley. So I spent like a bunch of years doing startups, was very early employee at a startup that raised about $63 million before it completely imploded. Then I was a big tech executive at Yahoo. I was there for about 10 and a half years running global expansion before it imploded as well too, right? And there's a track record. I spent 2 years just doing boards as advisory boards, mentoring a lot of different startup accelerators. I was a VC for about 6 years. So I started the San Francisco office for 500 startups. So I ran Fund 3 and Fund 4 and ran the core accelerator program there for about 6 years. So between the seed fund and the accelerator, I invested in over 414 pre-seed and seed stage startups over 6 years. I left 500. Well, they fired me nicely, but I left 500 end of 2019, beginning of 2020. And now I'm sort of a solo capitalist. So I do a bunch of different things. I have my own rolling fund called Diaspora that actually focuses on pre-seed stage European founders coming to the US. I have an angel fund where I actually invest in Series A all the way to sort of Series sort of like F opportunistically. And I also have a gaming holding company, which is sort of like, we operate a bunch of gaming studios, and I sit on a bunch of different investment committees. So I sit on the investment committees of 5 different VC funds across the globe. So I do a bunch of different things. I jokingly call myself sort of like a portfolio entrepreneur, but most of my job is investing. So yeah, a bit about me.
Awesome. Thanks, Martin. That's a heck of a lot of great experience. And I want to hear more about that. For Diaspora Ventures, first of all, what's in the name, and how did you decide to go out on your own and start your own thing versus joining another group? How do you make that decision?
Yeah, it's a good question. Where I'm fairly old. I'm in my sort of like 40s now, right? So late 40s, and it's one of those things you sort of like. There's a great saying. It's like, better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven. And so truth is, it's just sort of like running your own show. It just this is why I think a lot of you think about being entrepreneurs, right? Like there's some benefit of actually like being part of a large organization, company. You learn a lot there. You get paid a paycheck every 2 weeks. But you don't really have control, right? Like just like your boss, especially in the US, where we have this thing called the at-will clause, like they don't like your tie, they can fire you, right? And so there is something about sort of like running your own show. And so right now, the way I've optimized, and this is something I think a lot about, right? Like there's money and there's also quality of life. And a lot of times quality of life is freedom. You deciding who you get to work with, deciding who you get to invest in. And you don't always get that when you work with other people versus when you do stuff yourself. So Diaspora, this idea Diaspora, right? Where, we have a lot of, I've had a lot of success investing in European founders. And so this thesis is very specific where my partner and I, Carlos, he's French, I'm Canadian, Canadian American. We just have a very, very good network of European founders here in the US, and we know a lot of people in Europe, and it's a very specific thesis. We find immigrant founders tend to be way better. This is just and we have a specific network that we can tap into. And so Diaspora, so that's the thinking. So Diaspora is the immigrant network.
Right. So it seems like this wasn't you guys saying, we think we need, like, I don't want to work for anyone, I want to work for myself. It was saying, hey, we have this idea of this thesis and nobody is doing this, therefore we have to start this. It's right.
To some extent. And it was a good, to be honest, like the reality is that these it's an AngelList rolling fund. And so it's like sub like 2 million a year, right? It's a very, very small fund, but it lets us stay in the game. It's 5 to 10 hours a week. And we get to invest in companies and work with companies, which is amazing, right? Like, Jeffrey, this as well too, the juice is, it's not necessarily about the money, it's about the game. And it's about working with like super smart people, right? Like it's like, that's the best part. And I actually think about, for me, why I love early stage investing is that, you're basically investing in the arc of the entrepreneur's career. And so a lot of times it's like, I joke, but it's not, it's kind of true, is, VC is really the human potential business, right? Like we're in the human potential business, more so than universities now, in my opinion.
Gotcha. Yeah. And that's, I'm with you on that, on the founder aspect of it, not just the money or whatever. We, in fact, we take that to an extreme within Boomtown and the Comcast sports tech program. We offer almost no money and really look at the program and how we can help entrepreneurs, and really believe in the people, the technology, and what's happening. And hope that we can help them get funded in the future. But we're like, look, let's invest in entrepreneurs, people.
And this raises a question, right? So Carrie asked, like, so you invest in people and not ideas. I actually think the two things are very, very tied together, right? So the idea is important, but it's probably 80% on the person, and they're tied together because like this idea is sort of like, probably heard this term, missionary versus mercenary, right? Like you want somebody who's like, I'm working on this thing because like I'm deeply interested in it, right? In solving the problem. And I'm curious of your thoughts on this, Jeffrey, right? Like this is meant to be a conversation versus sort of an interview. I'm curious on your thoughts because we both work super early with these folks.
You're totally right. I mean, it's people first, and then ideas. I mean, you can have the, you know, the best idea, but if you don't have the team to actually make it happen, it's not going to work. And you know, this is a lot of what we think about when we're interviewing companies, saying, hey, you know, what's your ability to make this happen, and where does this come from? And a lot of times, if it's, you know, hey, this is this idea that has great, and we're going to replicate it, and we think we can make it quick and easy and get in and get out and make some money, is like, okay, what, but maybe not so much. But if you're saying, hey, I've been in this industry for years, I am passionate about this, and I've been thinking about this problem, and I think I have the way forward, right? And I'm going to make this happen. That's the people that we want to invest in. The other thing that I can say on that topic is, in terms of, you know, I interview entrepreneurs all day, and the people that I love talking to are not necessarily the salespeople or even the CEOs, but it's the CTOs, or even, you know, the scientists and engineers who are coming to me, and maybe even out of like an SBIR program, right? Like a government, you know, grant funded scientific research program, right? That are saying, I'm the subject matter expert in this. I'm really passionate about it. I have this science here. How do we make this? How do we move this forward? I'm like, look, you've got the idea, you've got the passion for it. I think building the business and the marketing and all that, that's the part that, you know, that's easy to me.
You can learn that stuff, right?
Passion.
Like the tech stuff is the hard stuff, in my opinion.
Exactly.
It's just like, it's much easier. It's much easier for a technology person to learn the business stuff, the business person to learn the technology stuff.
Totally.
And so, you know, I mean, there's the two things that sort of come to mind, where it's like this idea. One of my mentors, a guy named Mike Maples, you know, used to tell me this story where it's like you're looking for the missionaries, right? Because like you know, you don't want the MBA types. Not to say there's anything wrong with MBAs, but it's like, you know, someone who's like, you know, mobile's big, right? Like mobile's big and fashion's big, and I'm going to put them together, and this is going to be a big, massive market. And like, that just never works out, right? Like, just like that never works out. So you really have to be, like, is it that missionary versus sort of mercenary?
Right.
And one of the tests that I can tell sort of like a missionary versus mercenary is like the missionaries, like there's this term, if you Google, it's called like the idea maze. I forget who wrote there's a really great blog post about, but the idea maze. I think Chris Dixon wrote this really interesting blog post. It's just like, when you talk to founder, and like you as you ask them their questions, like you can tell they spend like all their time like in that idea maze, right? Like, I've thought about this way and this way and this way and this way and this way. Like, I just think it's one of the best sort of like gauges of sort of someone's interest in a topic. And that's really the only way. Like, you have to be really, really into it, because like doing a startup is so hard. Like, it's really hard.
It is really hard, and you really got to be into it. So speaking of which, I want to talk more about diaspora and you know, other VCs that you've worked with. Who comes to mind? You know, tell us about some of the companies you've worked with in the past, you know, where it's embodied this, where it's been, you know, amazing founder, amazing ideas. And then, since we're talking about fundraising here, what was their path to fundraising?
Yeah. Okay.
And you can talk in generalities if you don't want to reveal any company if you want.
Yeah. I mean, I could mention, you know, one of the companies I'm probably most proud of is a company called Shippo. And so I met, like, you know, they came through my first program, Laura and Simon, you know, super young, sort of like, they're like 24, 25-year-olds, right? And just like watching, it's so interesting watching sort of like, because they started a company previously in the e-commerce space and realized like, wow, this is really not going anywhere. And one of the problems they actually saw was like, wow, shipping is actually a huge issue for e-commerce. And so this was back in 2013, 2014. And so now, like, you know, fast forward, like now almost close to 8 years now, like this company's worth like a couple $2 billion, you know, making like highly profitable, have raised like a lot of money as well too. And what is great is just like they took the chance, like their net worth now, like just in secondaries, let alone sort of like they're worth, like Laura and Simon are worth like probably 50x of what I am, maybe more, probably 100x of what I am right now. And I'm so happy for them, right? Because I look at them, I'm just like, wow, like they're not even 30 yet. And I'm just like, wow, like they're doing so much better than I am in many ways, but like I had a little part of that. It just makes me feel so good. But, you know, from the fundraising stuff, like, you know, the reality is that they just learned, like they were, you know, the great thing about having a data sample set that I have of working with like amazing founders like Laura and like Alessio from Pipefy, which is I believe almost another unicorn now. Eric Hall, right? Like the French team from Eric Hall. Like I've worked with like Matt from Embroker. Like these are all like very, very sort of like well-known companies now, but just being with them in the beginning and just watching sort of like their learning curve of just like their ability to sort of like just fundraising is hard, right? Like the reality of one thing I'll just say as a generality is just like, the last 2 years, the environment that we saw, I'm gonna say maybe the last 4 or 5 years, I'm curious of your thoughts, Jeffrey, is very unusual of just like fundraising was relatively easy. There was a lot of money in the system now. It's changed now, right? In the last, like, I'm going to say 8 weeks, their environments dramatically changed now. And so unfortunately, there's a lot of founders who are just like used to the fact that you do the A and then you get the B and then the C. And it's not easy, but it's relatively easy. It's never as easy as they say it is, but it's relatively easier. And so there's always used to having money around with business models that don't necessarily work. And so I think the reality is that you're going to see this really winnowing of this environment. And the truth of the matter is the best companies are ones like what I find is that if you have an easy series A, like a series sort of seed, you're going to have a very hard series A. If you have a hard series A, your series B is actually usually better, right? Because they're just you're just like, and this is something I've seen over and over and over again with my founders of just like a lot of times it just sort of there's an element of luck. There's an element you happen to be in a space that's like super sexy like with investors. That changes very quickly. And so what is sexy 1 year or 6 months changes very, very quickly. And so you just have to be aware that there's a huge element of timing and luck involved in this sometimes too. And it's not just because like you're super smart and everyone loves you. That changes very quickly.
I can't stress that enough with the timing and the luck. I mean, the environment has changed significantly lately, both for private investing and just public investing too. I mean, you've got I think people are quickly shifting away from these the companies that aren't making money, and the subscriber-based model. I had a conversation with someone yesterday about people being oversubscribed and just burnt out on subscriptions. See the net, took a big slide the other day.
Oh yeah. Oh, they got hammered. Did you see that? Oh my God, they got hammered.
Exactly. And so it's like, okay, like some big shifts are coming here. Netflix hammered, Disney, like there's
and that has massive ramifications on VC. And totally. And one of the things that I will have to mention to people is like, how long, this is why we prefer missionaries over sort of mercenaries, because mercenaries are like, oh, I'm going to work on this for 2 years. I'm going to sell it to Facebook or Google. I'm like, good luck with that. Right. Like, just like, I've never, ever seen that work out ever. Right. And so the reality is, if you actually look at the typical exit, you must know this number, Jeffrey. You know what the number is for the typical exit for a VC sort of company, like the range, right? Like, how long do you think it takes for a company to exit?
I have no idea.
9 to 12 years.
You're right.
9 to 12 years.
That's a good amount.
And so this is one of the things that I tell founders where it's like, look, if you're not prepared to work on this for like at least like if you're looking for that, like looking to go build something substantial, 9 years, right? Like that, at least 9 years. If this is not something you want to be doing for 9 years, where it's like, this is just a money thing, there are way easier ways of making money. Go to Wall Street, right? Go join a management consulting firm, an iBank, like go do that. Right. Because like, there's no sure thing in startups. Like, most of the very successful founders, even if you look back at their track records, right? Like the co-founding team, for example, of Instacart, this is his 9th company. Like,
good amount of companies.
That's a lot of companies, right? Like, this is really hard.
A lot, but you got to appreciate the fight he's got in him to keep on making it happen. That 9 to 12 years figure is interesting. That with Boomtown, we've been our portfolio, I think, is about 8 or 9 years old right now. It's always interesting looking at our projections and saying, okay, we've had a couple liquidity events, but it takes time for these early seed stage companies to mature and get to these events. So Carrie, thanks for asking these questions. That's actually a good lead into Carrie's question. She asked, at what point is it of a business is it advisable to start actually fundraising and getting investors? In this case, for a business that is focused on digital skills, right? So do you start immediately fundraising you try to, do you do friends and family round, or do you try to just bootstrap yourself until you absolutely have to? How do you strike that balance?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. Like, look, there's no right or wrong question. There's no right or wrong, right? Like there are some founders and there's some businesses that you can fundraise with like just an idea. And there are other ones where it's like, well, maybe you should go and like prove out this, go prove this out a little bit more, either raise friends and family money or try to bootstrap or do this on the side and answer a couple key questions first before you go like fundraise. And so the reality is there's no right or wrong answer. I've just seen so many different sort of like I've just seen so many different paths. And unfortunately, the one thing I will say is like one of the things I don't like about what I see in media right now and these startup myths of just like you have to fundraise, because the reality is that, I wonder if you know this number too. Do you know how many companies out there out of the 10,000 companies out there that get started every year, how many of them actually end up raising VC money?
Out of the 10,000, I don't know, maybe 1,000.
Yeah, so 3%.
Right. There we go.
Yeah, it's like 3 to 5,
Not
depending on the year. Right?
Okay.
Like,
okay, but so then I guess the corollary to that is out of that. So that's 3% that actually end up raising VC money.
Yeah.
What percentage of those companies get to revenue? Is it less than that 3%? Is it the only the ones who end up raising, or are there a couple breakouts that don't actually have to raise, can bootstrap and make it happen for themselves and get to revenue?
Yeah. So for example, Calendly. Do you know that they didn't raise hardly anything, right? Like they actually came to me and there was a 15 mil cap, and I remember like, and so they raised like $750,000 or $900,000 like angel money, all angel money, yeah. And then so they basically didn't raise any more money for like close to 5 years, and then they sold a bunch of secondaries, like raised at a $3 billion valuation. And so he took a bunch of I love stories like that, right? Or what's the other company out of Atlanta, that email company with the monkey? MailChimp, right? Like they didn't raise any money. That was totally bootstrapped. Exit for $11 billion. Atlassian is another one, actually.
Atlassian has really been making some waves. They've done well for themselves.
Yeah, so I interviewed, so when I was running 500, the core accelerator, I interviewed Scott, one of the two co-founders, and so they bootstrapped it. They basically got money from customers. For the first 5 years, they just bootstrapped it and just ran it like based on customer revenue. And so they did raise a little bit of money, but they sold it mainly as secondaries. And so they basically, like about 5 or 6 years in, they came to Silicon Valley and they just went to a bunch of VCs. Here's our business. Whoever gives us the best offer at the end of this week, we'll take it. And so Excel did it, and they sold the secondaries. And that was the only money that they actually quote unquote raised. And so when they went public, this is what the story I love. When they went public, this is a company that, well, at least I don't know what the valuation is now. When I checked it like 6 months ago, it was about $34 billion. Guess how much money each of the co-founders actually own of that? Each of the founders own 35%, 70% of the of that.
They kept 70%.
Yeah.
That's good on them.
Yeah, amazing, right? Like they
love to see their cap table there.
Yeah, their cap table is amazing. And so, you don't hear enough of these stories of these people who do this, because like, for example, like, the two of those guys, Mike and Scott, they own the two biggest real estate properties in Australia. They're Australians, right? So like, this gives you an idea of just how well they've done. So it's just, it's funny. Yeah, so good for them.
Another great segue. Thanks to Carlos here. Thank you, Carlos, for the question. He's asking about the relationship of fundraising to equity. How much do you give away in the beginning, and how do you strike that balance? I for one, in our experience with Comcast and Boomtown, for our program, and we're not a traditional VC, we run an accelerator program, so it's kind of a different model, but we take up to 12% equity. We've gone down to 1%, and all the way up to 12%. We specifically only take common stock equity, no preferred classes of stock, so no liquidation preference, no board seats, and we try to be founder friendly and make it, give ourselves the motivation to really help these companies for the foreseeable future of the company, rather than have a liquidation preference and be able to be like we'll see who works. Martin, what do you think about that? And for an early seed stage, pre-seed, how much should you give away?
Yeah, I mean, the general rule of practice is usually somewhere between like, obviously if you can, 10% is good, right? But I would say a good range is between 10 to 25% typically at every single round that you're raising. That's a good rule of thumb. Probably not more than that, right? And and cap tables are really, really important. They're just like one of the things you have to think about the dilution piece is remember, like your equity, the as you sort of like hit business milestones, like your equity is worth more. But remember, the more you give up in your cap table, the more as more money comes in, the more you get diluted. And so just one of those things are just like a general rule is like 10 to 25% every single round is a generally good rule to sort of like follow when you're fundraising, to sort of make sure you're not giving up too much, and that you still have the incentive to basically like keep on going, because a screwed up cap table too early makes VCs not want to not want to sort of invest. And interesting story, one of the companies that has now done really well was like I learned about cap tables the hard way. And so this is probably my best performing accelerator batch, is batch 14. I took in 3 European companies. All of them had screwed up cap tables. I never asked a question, and this is how you learn. I spent so much time fixing them. Aircall was one of them. Their cap table was completely screwed up. And so if we did not fix it, they would not have been able to raise money.
Oh man.
That was brutal.
Well,
and I'll never do that
glad
again.
to have you. So for the entrepreneurs on the line with us, how do you avoid a screwed up cap table from the beginning? I mean, if I can plug Carta, we like to use Carta with a lot of our entrepreneurs, just to say, hey,
great product.
Put it on
great
the platform, keep it organized on this platform. But what do you like to see? If someone sends you their Carta cap table, is that cool? Or what else?
I would love to see, like, that's perfect, right? Like a Carta cap table. I think like there's so many tools now where before it used to be Excel sheets, right? And you have to go like double check if this is actually correct. But now you have tools like Carta and other products. But Carta's, I would say, they're probably have become the standard now in general, right? And so a tool in general I recommend to use. And so that's an easy way just to go like, I want to see who's on your cap table. I want to understand sort of what the cap table looks like. And I want to make sure, particularly at seed stage, that the founders still own, like whether it's 2 or 3 founders, but like at least you still own the majority of it, like the investor doesn't own more than 25% of the company, right? Like most of this should be owned by you as a founders, because when you go raise later on, you're going to get diluted. And so, I've seen, for example, I've seen like egregious stuff out of a lot of the emerging markets, right? Like whether it's like Brazil or like Latin America, Middle East, where the founders like at seed stage own like, both of them maybe own like 40% or 30%. And I'm like, I can't invest in this. Right. Like, it's just like, you're not incentivized. You're going to raise your A, you raise your B, like you're just not going to be incentivized, knowing how long this is going to take, how painful the journey is. A lot of them are like, this sucks. Why am I doing this for? Right. Like, even there's an exit, like I take so little of it. And so this is one of the problems with a lot of like angel investors or newbie investors that do this. I'm just like, you're not doing yourself a favor. You're like wrecking the company, right? Because the founders are everything in this business.
Totally. So a screwed up cap table to a potential investor can really kill the deal or put some significant impediments in it. Yeah. What else can put impediments in that process, and what can these early stage entrepreneurs do to really be able to have a great first conversation with potential investors, and smooth things along, give them confidence? So
one of the things that I recommend that all founders do, which they don't do, but there's 2 things that they should do. Number one, like do a little bit of homework on the investor that you're talking with, like who's in their portfolio. Even better, like honestly, like, sort of if you can talk to, like have a network into the portfolio companies of this investor. And so when you show up, it's like, oh, this person's done some homework, right? I'm shocked all the time of just like, you talk to founders and like, did you not like check the website, like of what you do? Like, it's just like, what? Like, it's just, I don't know. It's just like, do your homework, right? Like, it's like when you show up at a sales meeting, you don't know who it's like, so what does your company do again? Like, you're not gonna make a sale over there. So it's no different with fundraising. The other thing that I actually strongly recommend that you do is you do what I call like an FAQ, like the frequently asked questions. What are all the questions that you think someone would ask about your business especially the ones that you don't want to be asked, right? And make sure you have an answer. And so like, these are two very basic things. I'm continually shocked at just how unprepared founders are. Just by not doing these two things, if you just do these two things, you're ahead of 80% of most, I'd say 90% of most founders out there now.
I can't agree with you more. When in interviewing founders, if I'm able to find a topic that they keep dancing around, obviously that's all I'm going to want to talk about and get into that. And the more they dance around it, the worse it gets. So that FAQ of things you don't want to be asked is brilliant, because you know, if a founder came to me and I had an issue with their IP or where that's assigned, or I don't know, something about their business, and they're like, actually, yeah, great question. We've thought about that a lot. That's a tough spot for us. Here's what we think about it. In fact, here's an FAQ about the whole thing, or, you know, like we have an answer for that.
Yeah.
Or I got to say, you know, for early stage founders, if I ask a question and it's something they don't want to be asked, and they approach it head on and say, that's a good question. We are thinking about that and we're scared about that and we don't know the answer.
Yeah, and that's okay. The one thing I will add is that we don't know the answer, but here's some of the things that we're doing to try to figure this out. Right? Like that's a great answer.
And that's the entrepreneur you want to talk to, who's really thoroughly considering those answers and is thinking about a million different ideas and is willing to engage experts, you know, and investors, and say, let's make this happen, guys. Let's find the answers and make it happen. Not the CEO salesperson who is always representing that they have all the answers and they just need $1 million and it's going to be perfect.
Yeah, you know? that doesn't work, right? Because, you know, think about what Jeffrey and I do. We talk to founders. Like I look at hundreds of decks a week. You know, I talk to at least like 10 to 30 founders a week, at least, sometimes more, right? Depending on the season and time. And so, you know, when you talk to these many founders, like there are just certain things you're able to sort of hone in on, not because they're particularly smart. Like you did exactly what we did. You'll get pretty good at this. Of just like, you look at certain business models, like, I know this is an issue. Do they have an answer for that issue? Right. Or, you know, like, and so these are just some of the things that I would definitely sort of like think about, and make sure you have answers to them. And if you don't have an answer, don't lie about it and don't try to like flub around. It's like, I don't know the answer, but I'm thinking about it, or I'm going to get back to you on that one, and actually do it, right? Like, and actually get back to us. Yeah, that's the best, when they actually engage and get back to you on big problems. I also like when startups that I'm talking to and we're not actively engaged will, you know, subscribe me to their updates feed, and I get, you know, a monthly email saying, hey, here's our traction, here's what's new with us, you know, here's what we're thinking about right now, even without an ask, just to be like, oh, hey, glad you guys are working on it. And now this month it looks like you've reached this threshold, like, let's talk again. I love that. So, you know, people who say like, hey, are you okay with us, you know, putting you on our sort of like, you know, investor list, or, you know, sort of updates, whether it's monthly or quarterly. You know, this is something I'm actually really, really surprised that a lot of founders don't do either, of just like, this is such a simple thing to do, but it's also a great way to keep yourself accountable, because like that, then there's a forcing function for you and your team to basically deliver results and show results, because it's like, we have to do this, and it's just good practice, especially when you raise money, like later on, like to be able to go and look at the progress they made. And so I don't know if this is something that you see, where like, I care a lot about sort of like, you know, why ask a lot of questions of founders, like, how long have you worked on this? What have you, you know, how much have you raised? How much have you actually gotten accomplished over that time period? And if you see a founder where it's like, wow, like they've just done so much, like just over this time period, you know, the period of time, that's impressive to me, because that's not that common. And so it is a great tool where even if you aren't making progress, just the fact that they're keeping accountable, here's some things we learned, here's some things that's going on, you're like, that's actually progress sometimes.
Totally. That accountability is key. And just the vibe from the entrepreneur, that they are holding themselves accountable and thinking about this and honest about where they're at, and they actually want to make true progress. And we'll talk about it even if they haven't made progress. I think is a really cool thing. Elif asked a question from the very early stage about bootstrapping. friends and family, crowdfunding? Where do you get that initial start of cash just to I don't know, spin up some AWS instances or whatever it is?
Yeah, I mean, these are all valid, these are all valid things, right? Or just like friends and family money. Like if you really believe in what you're doing, this is, you should, you're giving your friends and family, in theory, you're giving your friends and family an opportunity, right? To support you, but also to potentially build something that's interesting. And sometimes like for some investors, this is a signal where it's like, well, if you really care, like if you really believe in what you're doing, then how come you can't get money from other folks? Indiegogo is really good. I think it's a combination like bootstrapping to friends and family money to Indiegogo. These are all valid ways of actually starting, right? Like there's no one path. Doesn't matter what people say, and don't buy into all the media and the Silicon Valley myth of just like, you have to raise money from VCs. You're only real company do that. There's just so many ways. Government grants, depending on the country that you're in.
Totally.
Hell yeah, take them, right? Like that's your tax dollars at work. Like take the government grants if that sort of like is what is needed. There's nothing wrong with it. I have no issues. I think it's amazing.
Yeah, glad to hear you say something about the government grants aspect. I think that's a really cool way to do it. And there's a lot of opportunity out there. There's so much opportunity for grant funding. I've personally sat on a couple SBIR phase 2 advisory boards, and really interesting hearing what goes through those kinds of
and usually
programs.
deep tech stuff too, right? So for example, like there are just some things that just a VC won't touch until it's like really de-risked. And so in certain countries, like particularly in Europe, there's so many grants programs. And so I'm like, you're paying for it anyways, get your fill, right? Like get your fill of it. So like, why wouldn't you do it? Like I never understood that. It's like, oh, the government grants. I'm like, I think if the government grants are too onerous, where like you have to do like massive reporting and things, and you have to sort of think a little bit about that, right? And
there's overhead, but it can be worth it if you can get into it. That's awesome. Thanks for the insights on all of that. Let's see. Wanted to talk about, there's a couple things here. I wanted to go back in my list of topics a little bit to your thesis for diaspora, because I believe in that as well, and I think that's really cool. You and I were both sitting here in the United States. Right, so we have we're in the U.S. market economy, in that headspace and everything, but you're investing in European and immigrant founders coming to the U.S. Why do you think the U.S. is a good place for European or immigrant founders to come to? And what, tell us about the process of a foreign company getting investors in the U.S., coming to the U.S., making themselves appealing to U.S. investors versus international investors.
Yeah. So one of the things I will say is just sort of like, there's a macro reason, right? So I'm Canadian and American, so I've lived in the U.S. now for 22 years, but I actually grew up in Canada. And so one of the things I will say is just like, look, U.S. has its problems. U.S. is still the best market to be as an entrepreneur. I have a lot of issues with sort of quality of life. To be frank, my quality of life here kind of like it's not, I have nothing to complain about, but compared to my quality of life in Canada or in Kiev, like in Ukraine, I spent a lot of time in Ukraine because my holding company's out there. It's just like, oh my God, my quality of life is so much better over there. But when it comes to like real sort of business friendliness of setting up entities, the amount of money, the entrepreneurial things, like this is the best market. Like I legitimately think this is the best market to build a business, in my opinion, like particular tech business. And so that's sort of the macro. Why I like the immigrant stuff, because like just by nature of being an immigrant, you're entrepreneurial. You're giving up everything that you know from home to basically start off somewhere. This is why so much admiration for immigrants, so much admiration for my parents. Like I'm super grateful. Like everything I am now and I have is due to them, right? Like they gave up a very nice life in Taiwan to move to the US and then eventually to Canada. And so just that nature of just like doing that. And so there's no surprise that if you actually look at, I don't know if you saw this number, 50% of the best companies in Silicon Valley, not just unicorns, but like exited companies, 50% are actually immigrant founders or children of immigrants. There's probably something there. There's probably something there, right? Like you're like, oh, okay. And so, it's just something I think about. And so, with European founders, why that specific thesis, just, to sort of go into sort of like the diaspora, lot of times, like, to be frank, quality of life in Europe is pretty good. But business culture is not necessarily good. Market culture, exit culture just doesn't exist there. And so there is something from coming over here. The one challenge, though, is just that there's a mental adjustment. US is brutal. I actually think it's one of the most, outside of China, these are the two most competitive markets. And so I talk to founders who's like, oh, I can make it. I'm a big shot in France. I'm like, who cares? Right? You're coming to US now. It's a complete different market. Or even same thing, Canada. Going from Canada, coming over here, I got the crap kicked out of me. First 4 or 5 years was just like, you don't understand. Like, I was a hot shot in Canada. You're nobody who come over here. So you have to really learn how competitive this place is. And so there is something about that. And so why we exist is that we help our companies think through, like, sales and marketing is way more important here. Storytelling is way more important. So we spend a lot of time working with the companies on, like, what's the story that you're actually building out, the pitch decks, and even just like how do you tell the story overall, right? Like your startup story, which is a great book, by the way. So a friend of mine wrote this book called The Startup Story. He's a theater guy, startup guy, big corporate guy. It's called Your Startup Story by David Reamer. It's actually one of the best books to sort of like think about what you're building and talk about it in a very coherent way. That when I think about story, your story is not just for fundraising. Your story is for recruitment. Your story is for partnerships. Your story is for sales. These are all the things that I think Americans are just like really freaking good at, like just naturally, like in the blood. I think, I'm curious, you heard this other stat. How many marketing messages do you think the average American gets a day? I heard different numbers, but just curious of what have you heard?
Way too many. I'll tell you that.
3,000.
What?
3,000, right? So
crazy.
It's literally like of just whether it's online ads, TV ads, just like it's insane, right? Like direct mail, it's like this crazy number. So think about this, right? If anybody's visited New York, like Times Square, it's like you're walking through Times Square every day. That's the average American. So as marketers, like I learned sales and marketing here is like there's nobody that does it better. The storytelling, right? Like these are things like I grew up in Canada. Right? Like we speak English. And so you're like, oh, well, that's easy. I'll go down to US. It'll be super easy. No, it isn't. It's the culture is like really, really different. So, my daughter, she's 12 now, but this is a true story of just showing sort of like how ingrained the storytelling is in the culture. So she went to daycare, at age 2, age 3. So at age 3, you know what they do every week? Show and tell. Oh, here's my teddy bear. Like it's so ingrained in the culture. We never had that in Canada. I never got any of that stuff.
I didn't know that. That seems, I grew up in Ohio. That seems natural, right?
Yeah, well, that's a very American thing, right? So this is why, like, they're just, Americans are great presenters. Not everyone, but like most, like there's a natural ability here. And this is what you're competing against, right? So, I'm on the investment committee, like just a selection committee for German Accelerator, where we bring over a lot of, like they're friends of mine. So I try to help out, right? Because I've run accelerators. And so, I bring over, like, we go and look at like German companies that have raised like series, seed, series A, series B to come to the US. And they just get, when they come over, like they do well in Germany, they have all these amazing customers, but they come over to the US, they get the crap kicked out of them. Just like, it's just a complete mental shift. They're just like, no, your story sucks, right? Like, no, you got to fix this. No, you got to do these things. Like in sales, you got to talk about these things. And so it's a real mental change. And so we spend a lot of time with our founders of just like, here's what you need to do to prepare when you're coming out here. Setting up US entities, pretty straightforward because of like Stripe Atlas now. Strongly recommend. This is new, right? Like 5 years ago, Stripe Atlas didn't exist. But now you have a lot of tools you can actually set up. Like you need a US entity if you're going to raise money in the US. As an example, like basic things like that. We take that for granted, right? Like now it's like, oh, Stripe Atlas. Before that was not that easy.
Got it. Okay, so the next corollary question to that is, in giving advice to early stage entrepreneurs who are trying to come to maybe coming to the US, how do they, on a maybe more functional level, how do you even start conversations, or how do you even meet and access US investors? Obviously, I'd like to think that a great way is sitting on this this chat with us and emailing us after and saying hello. But how do you even address people? We were talking about, before this started, we were talking about some conferences we're going to and events, and I know there's cold emails, there's outreach. Like what works?
My view is actually the networking piece. So I think I'm a big fan in general conferences. I'm a big fan of certain meetups, and thankfully, at least in the US, the pandemic's for all intents and purposes is over. So conferences and meetups are back now. Like SF, if you asked me like 6 months ago, like, oh my God, this place is still a dump. Like it's still a dump, but like everyone's meeting again. Like people didn't want to meet before. Now, like last 2-3 months, everyone's meeting now. So it's become standard. So I think this idea is just everything's gonna be done on Zoom. People want to meet with people want to have coffees. And so I do think Zoom is probably the first step of just like, you have the initial conversation on Zoom, but you're eventually going to want to meet. And so the way that I think that founders should think about this is the way that you get into investors. Talk to the investors portfolio company, network with investors portfolio company. So if you talk to any of my portfolio companies and they make an intro, I have to almost pretty much take that meeting. Right, because they're basically, or find a way to get to me, right? So for example, if Igor is like, hey, Igor is willing to vouch for you, I'm going to take that meeting, right? If Jeffrey is going to vouch for you, I'm going to take that meeting. I would assume, at least I'll give him time.
I love that you just honed in on that, because that is so completely true. And I never actually think about that. If one of our portfolio companies makes an intro, or somebody comes in and say, hey, I was just talking to Jake of MindPass, like you said, I will just send them right away my Calendly link and say, hey, sure thing, set up a 30-minute meeting, let's talk. Whereas if company comes in cold, I will send them a different link. I'll send them our application link and say, hey, please apply to our program. You'll get in our system. We'll take a look at your application, and if we want to reach out to you, we'll set up a call.
Yeah, I mean, my problem with the cold thing is there's two issues. There's just and so I know like a lot of people will criticize this, but I just think like it's just, there's two very practical reasons. Number one, it's just like, you know how many cold emails I get? I just don't have the mental bandwidth and time to deal with the cold emails that come in. I just can't. It's too much. So it's cold emails, pings on Facebook, pings on LinkedIn, pings on Twitter. It's too much noise.
It's just too many channels.
Too many channels.
Yeah, you got to be able to filter it out. Somehow it's got to be filtered. I get messages from our contact form on the website that have like this, like a copy and paste, like rambling thing, and it's like, oh my God, no, don't do that.
It's too much, right? And so there's that of just from a logistics and time, just like way too much crap. Second thing, to be frank, is just like, look, if you can't find a way to get to me, right? Like, like I have I think probably 7,000 folks that I know on LinkedIn. Like, you can't find a way and find somebody in my network, find somebody out of the 800 founders I've worked with, right? Like to basically find a way to get to me. Like, how good are you? And that is fair, unfair, but like I've invested in like founders all over the world. And so like, if you can't have the creativity or the hustle to go find somebody, like even an investor friend, like just somebody to vouch for you, I'm just like, are you really good? That means like, how are you going to recruit? How are you going to find a co-founder? How are you going to find other investors? How are you going to find customers? Like, it's almost like that's sort of like an analogy for sort of like how you do business.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So what about other venues to actually meet up with potential investors and professionals in person? We mentioned a couple events that we are all thinking about going to. Are there any that really stand out as just a good way to go mix with people that any of these guys should think about?
Yeah, Jeffrey, here's what I tell people, right? So, I'll give you an example, and there's a point to this, and I will answer the question, but it's like, somebody asked me, right? And it's just like, they ask you like, what's the best copywriting book, or what's the best networking book that you'd recommend? And I'm like, well, you kind of just got to read them all, right? Like, this just might be one, like, you kind of just got to read them all. And so people are like, what's the best event I should go to? I'm like, well, I can give you a specific recommendation, but you kind of just got to do like, when I first came to Silicon Valley, I didn't know anybody or anything. I literally spent a year going to every single freaking meetup, every single conference, every single dinner party, just to go build my network, right? Where it's like, you kind of just got to go do that. And so I don't think there's a substitute for that, where There's no shortcut, and I don't know if there's any shortcuts, there's any hacks, or you kind of just got to read all the books. You kind of just got to go to all the conferences, and that's kind of how I built my network and sort of career. And I don't know if there's any hack, if I'm very honest, right?
No, I'm with you. And I think that's one of the things that I'm most looking forward to now that it's a bit easier to go out and socialize with people. Is just going to the random meetups and the smaller things, and not focusing on, one, like, okay, once a year I'm going to go to Web Summit, it's going to be the whole big thing, but just going to the local meetups and connecting with people. Denver, like here in this area, Denver Startup Week, Boulder Startup Week, all these little things are great.
Yeah. And the one thing I will say is just sort of like, this is something I see that founders do make a mistake, whether it's fundraising, sales, or whatever. It's just like, don't be transactional. And so, where one of the things I was, that at least what has been ingrained in me here culture wise is just like, don't be transactional. It's about building relationship. Like, don't do, have you heard of something like big timing? You're talking to somebody, but you're looking over the shoulder to sort of see if there's somebody better to talk with. Like, don't do that. And at the end of the day, like, just try to have good conversations, try to be helpful to people. If you do that, you'll do fine in this industry. Like, people who are transactional in this industry don't make it. Like, they just fundamentally don't last, right? And so everything I like, it's about thinking long-term, right? Like that Goldman Sachs saying is like, we're not short-term greedy, we're long-term greedy, right? And so the way you make it and the way you make money in this industry, you have to be long-term greedy. And that means like, just like building a wide network. And you build a wide network not by like being extractive. Like, you've met those investors or you've met those founders where you're talking with them, but you can sort of tell where it's like, well, I know they want something from me, right? And it's never a good feeling. It's never a good feeling.
I'm with you on that. Okay, so we have about half an hour left of our time here, and so I want to turn it around just a little bit. And turn it to our entrepreneurs and get you guys involved a little bit more. So I think we're certainly open to any random questions, and we certainly appreciate the questions in the chat. Trying to get through these are really great, and trying to order them in a way that makes sense. But I think Marvin and I would love to also hear from you and hear what you're up to and what you're thinking. So. Elif, Namachandra, and Carlos, since you're on video, we're going to call on you. And if anyone who is not on video wants to raise their hand, please do. Happy to call on you as well. What we'd love to hear is a quick, less than a minute, even a pitch on what you're up to, even just a one-liner, just so we know what you're working on and everything. And then would love to hear the 1 minute or 30-second thought on your fundraising goals and your plan for that, and what you're thinking of next steps, and what you know and what you don't know. And we're happy to weigh in a little bit. So who wants to go first? Okay, Elif, right. Go for it.
Hi, I'm Elif. I'm from Turkey, but currently I'm based in New York because I studied here. And actually, I fundraised in my tuition money before coming here. I raised more than $100,000 for my tuition. It was just cold emails. It was 3 years ago. And I think entrepreneurship was in my soul. And I graduated 3 months ago. And actually, it's like, I will pitch my idea first. My idea is PEEP. PEEP shows the number of available and public parking spaces in major cities. Parking is a big problem in New York City. Let me take you back to my story. Actually, it's like in last year in Turkey, my country suffered from severe wildfires, and I questioned my life. And I was an engineer, but I wasn't working for meaningful purpose, and I wanted to do something for environment. And actually, my undergrad is industrial engineering. I studied operation research and time optimization, and my master was computer vision and data science. All the parts just collected, and I come up with this idea. It's not like a pitch, but it was like how I come up with this idea and what I'm working on. I'm on MVP stage. I have two more co-founders. One is computer vision student, and the other one is business development person. What was I saying? Yeah, I'm on MVP stage. We are still working on the MVP. We are raising 15K on Indiegogo. I know it's so small for you, but it's, you know, in New York, I have no network. I'm trying to reach out to people with quality emails as I'm trying to join the conference, or, you know, I'm trying to meet the founders. I feel like I'm starting from very beginning, like maybe minus.
Yeah, but you know, the thing, one thing I will say, Elif, is that, you know, we all started somewhere, right? In some cases, sort of like started the same way, right? So I do think it'll take you some time. But the good thing with New York is that there are tons of like startup companies, there's tons of sort of like founders and lots of meetups in general. You know, I think Meetup is I think it's still around. It's been a while, but like Meetup's a good tool, and there's lots of conferences are happening, and a lot of times just like going and just like talking to people and in truth of the matter is like sharing your idea of just like, here's what we're working on. And you know, being the good thing about East Coast, they're very good about feedback in the sense of just like, I know I'd almost say they're kind of mean about the feedback versus the West Coast, which is like, they're not mean, but you don't know what it means. It's a little bit more passive aggressive. But, you know, the question I have is sort of like, when I hear about sort of like the parking piece, is like, well, okay, like, why do you think sort of like, you know, I get the problem. Then the question comes down to, well, there have been other people who've done this, right? So why is your approach different? How can this be like, how do you think about the business model of just sort of like, how do you make this sort of feasible as a business model? And as your MVP, when you launch your MVP, what are you trying to learn from the MVP? What's the one or two big questions you're trying to learn from launching the MVP? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That allows you to design sort of like who are you targeting, right? Like who's sort of like your ideal sort of like customer or user? These are, you know, like, so these are just some of the things that go through my head when you mention what you're doing.
Yeah, sure. I can start. Actually, I start with the B2C model. I'm targeting the people who commit to city every day. They could be businessmen or women, or they can be families who wants to, you know, come to city for restaurant or fun activities. It was my first business model, but after this program, it turned to a little bit B2B model, and now we are targeting more delivery companies, but car drivers, not the motorcycle, not bike, because they need. I mean, I have
the use case is more frequent. That makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. And this was one answer of the answer of one question. As the second question is, I know, like, there are lots of there are lots of great companies working on parking, but the one how can I say differentiator is in my model. It's like I'm getting the data from real-time traffic webcams. I'm performing some algorithms on image, and I'm returning the number of available spots. On MVP, now we are using the public data of the New York City real-time webcams. On MVP, I want to understand, it's just with these cameras, is it enough to create the precise system outputs? I'm trying to understand that. Probably I will need to install more cameras, or I need to do some partnership. And this was the answer of second question. And you asked one more question, I think, but I forgot.
Yeah, I totally.
And I can just say, it's like the competitors are focusing on more commercial garage or private garage, not public parking. I can say that.
How about you, Jeffrey?
I think so I think the two pieces of feedback from what you said. First of all, you kind of addressed the question: how are you going to get enough data? I mean, using public data, how do you get access to that, and where are you going to get the real-time data you actually need to be able to make this truly useful on a consistent basis? I think is the biggest question for me.
Yeah, but the funny thing, it's all public data, and you can just access, you can just Google it, and it's all public data. You can see how many there are 7,000 real-time webcams, and you can see everything. It's just like, the issue is the algorithm. If the algorithm will work perfectly, it's just because the angles are important. But on MVP stage, I want to understand that. It's just like, I'm trying to build the system. It's public data. It's just like, I want to test the accuracy of these webcams. If it fail, if it's not that good, it's definitely we need to install more cameras. Or there are Fireflyer company. I'm not sure if you know that. It's like, the top of the taxis, and it's the advertising tools. Like they founder is Turkish. It's just we can have a partnership.
Yeah, the new taxi in New York is made by a Turkish company, aren't they?
Yeah, I'm trying to say that.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many interesting potentially sources of data there, like putting cameras on cars. There's already cameras on cars. One thing that I learned just the other day is repo men, guys that do repossessions of cars for banks. They roll around with license plate readers and cameras on their cars, and just suck up this database of where every car is at all times.
I know this.
It's crazy.
One of our competitors are doing this.
Yeah, it's really, really an interesting data report. The other thing, and then we'll move on here for time. The other thing is, you mentioned that you're doing a like a Kickstarter campaign for $15,000. Indiegogo, right. In pitching to investors, I want to hear. I don't care about Indiegogo. I want to hear. We're raising $15,000 with these general terms, but to go towards what? Like, why do you need that money? What are you going to spend that on? We're using this for for AWS image recognition time, right, or whatever it is. And this is why we need this. And you don't need to answer this now. This is like rhetoric here.
Okay.
But in like, think about that and be able to really encapsulate that, so it can be like, okay, they've got an idea. This small amount of cash is going to really actually impact them, and this is what they're going to do with it. But really appreciate how I hope that Martin and I would agree on this. Really appreciate how passionate you can speak about this, and that you are obviously thinking about all of these big questions in your head, and like walking around on the street, like thinking about this, like, what am I going to do? You're the kind of entrepreneur that I think is really great. So good stuff.
Agreed.
Who wants to go next? Carlos, Liza.
I can.
All right.
Carlos,
ladies
what do you got?
first. No, ladies first.
Okay.
Yeah,
what do you got for us? Or can we go Namachanja first, and then Liza, and then Carlos?
That's all right.
Cool.
So our team is in a project that's dealing with cybersecurity, and the problem that we're trying to solve is there is a deep gap in the industry for cybersecurity experts, and the universities are also churning out so many students in cybersecurity. But the problem is the corporates are saying the students are not ready. So you have to spend time training them and exposing them to cyber war and ransomware. But again, the students are saying, I'm not going to get an opportunity unless you give me one. So basically, we are bridging that gap by giving a training ground, and having internship programs with the corporates, with mentorship and forums to, practice. So it's akin to, soldiers who are not having the opportunity to do field exercises. So you have it in theory, but you don't know how to hold a gun. So essentially, that's the gap we're trying to bridge by giving students opportunities as interns to existing corporates so that they can actually respond to cyber incidents. And now by the time they get into the corporate, they're giving solutions actually to businesses. In summary, that's what we're working on.
Cool. And what about the fundraising piece?
So right now we are looking for $100,000 to cover the next 3 to 4 years. And because we'll need to gain traction in the next 2 years. So we're going to do direct marketing, getting to universities and directly engaging corporates. Then once we build the traction in the next 2 years, we foresee that we're going to get more people interested. So it will be subscription. So if we can get to 500 to 1,000 people knowing that this works, then we'll have, more people signing up, and corporates will trust the brand that I can come here and get someone who will hit the ground running in cybersecurity.
Maybe I give one quick advice on Namachandra is that, there's this like old saying, is like, how to eat an elephant, and, it's piece by piece, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't know, instead of thinking about this over the next like 3 or 4 years, you have a master plan 3-4 years, but like think about breaking up your goals into sort of like smaller pieces. So you need to raise 100,000. Can you just raise like 15, 20,000? What can you prove with 15 or 20,000? What's that milestone that you can hit to sort of earn you, like, break up the piece, right? Like, so eat the elephant's leg, don't try to eat the entire elephant. That actually just might be easier, where it's like one of the things where it's like, maybe it's like 20 people. Can you prove this just for 20 people? And then sort of like, like build your playbook with a smaller amount, and then sort of like expand it over time. And instead of thinking about this over the next 2 or 3 years, think about it over the next year or next 6 months. That actually might be a much more digestible way of thinking about this. Jeffrey?
Right. Thanks, Marvin.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'd also say that, like, for 4 years, $100,000 is not a lot. It makes me think about how big you plan on taking this, and how quickly you're gonna try to scale. Yeah, I'm also interested to hear more insight into the division between building a training platform versus just building the curriculum and actually running this. And how are you going to make this into something that's going to be scalable and get away from the daily grind of building curriculum and running it and everything. And one example I know is just I forget what it's called, Matrix LMS, which Igor knows well. It seems like as a product, that's a pretty cool platform for managing learning. And how do you guys scale? Does Matrix allow you to scale? So those are thoughts on my mind. But appreciate your focus on cybersecurity. It's a huge thing.
Huge space, and will only become way more important.
Yeah. I had a conversation with someone about this yesterday, something that, and actually, Namachandra, you prompted this conversation. I was reviewing your one-liner from the list of companies yesterday, and then talking to some people about the industry. It's interesting that you at the early stage startup phase are thinking about a learning platform for training cybersecurity from the ground up. And that says to me a lot about the cybersecurity industry and the public's kind of consciousness about the relevancy of cybersecurity. I've been under the impression that for since the 80s, cybersecurity and a cybersecurity expert is the hardcore expert that has been into this personally for years and has been hacking away since they were hacking away on a BBS, and is now just an expert. And anything beyond those experts is IT, right? For setting up security. But now it's become so much more of a commodity and in the consciousness that there's room for entry-level cybersecurity people and to actually have that as a position separate from an IT professional, right?
I mean, it's a real industry now. It's a real, big, massive industry right now.
Massive.
And actually, one quick question. I just need like 1 or 2 minute break. I'm gonna run to the bathroom, but all right, I'll be back in.
Sure thing, Martin. All good.
All right. Thanks, Jeffrey. I think what I'll take the feedback from today is we haven't figured out everything. So we'll take that feedback and say, we still have a lot.
And that's what that's why we're here. We're happy to give you feedback. And then since we've got a minute, I'm going to put in the chat my LinkedIn. I think that's it. Yeah, there we go. There's my LinkedIn. Feel free to connect. Happy to answer any questions, and we'll get Martin to put in his LinkedIn Marvin to put in his LinkedIn so that we can all stay connected. What Marvin said about connecting with people and not reaching out cold is really, really important. And using LinkedIn to say, hey, this company I want to get to, who's my second, third degree connections? Let's get to them first is hugely powerful. So yeah, I'm a big fan of that. Igor, what do you think? Have you where do you get investors or startups in the industry reaching out to you? Is it LinkedIn? Is it your website? Do you have people cold emailing you? Hitting you up on WhatsApp?
It's a word of mouth usually. So like someone introducing someone, looking for funding, looking for startups. So I kind of like play a role of this connector, so like somehow
really
people come to me for an advice or to reach out to certain investors. Not necessarily they even know what kind of investors they're looking for. They just like, this is my company. Do you know anyone who could invest into my company, right? So and I just happen to know a bunch of people because again, I built my own network, as you guys mentioned earlier, like going to the conferences, organizing the conferences myself, and just building my kind of like own, personal brand. But yeah. Mainly those things, those like requests come from people in my network.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
And you are amazingly well connected, Igor. We even met each other through a mutual connection, my sister.
Exactly.
Right? So, many years ago.
Yeah.
Pretty good.
True. Yeah.
Let's see. Okay, Marvin, glad to have you back. Liza, we'd love to hear about what you're working on and what your fundraising plans are.
Yeah, hello everyone, and thanks Carlos for letting ladies first. So I'm working on the platform for event visitors and exhibitors, because currently on the market there are a lot of tools for event organizers, but nobody is thinking about exhibitors and visitors who are actually paying money in this industry, and they have really a lot of problems. And visiting events is a hectic experience. You need to meet people, you need to go through the expo floor, you need to reach your goals, and it's always difficult to understand whether you really reached your goals, whether you made it or not. And you spend a lot of money, a lot of efforts, a lot of time on these events. So yeah, it's quite difficult, and we decided to change it. So yeah, we plan to work with these two audiences, and of course we want to work with event organizers as well, because we really want to build this network and this tool that will be helpful for everyone, because of course with this tool you'll be able to get a lot of data. The platform will be quite complex, but we want to start with something really simple, with some AI recommendations for visitors and exhibitors, which events they need to choose, and also initial networking. And we do want to build this one tool that everyone can use all the time, because when you go to different conferences, you need to install different mobile applications to connect with people. It's all the time different app, and we want to build this one app that will be able to connect you with other people from these conferences. In terms of fundraising, we do plan to raise quite a lot of money. Actually, we want to raise $4 million for 2 years, but within these 2 years, we of course want to build this whole platform that will cover all the stages, that will cover this AI matching, networking. We will build the mobile application. We will of course have a lot of data processing, data analysis that will give all the participants information to make the right decisions that will be good for them. And of course marketing, because we want to go to the market of the United States. As Marvin said, that's a great market. That's one of the biggest market in the world. People are speaking the same language. It's easier to approach this market. So, and you really need to do a great marketing, and for a good marketing, you need a lot of money. But yeah, the main, so we want still to build a lot of connections with event organizers and build this community of people who are into events. So that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I guess to be honest, when I hear sort of that 4 million is a lot of money, right? And so I think
I'm from Belarus, just to clarify,
yeah, it's a lot of money in general. And one of the things that I would caution most founders of just like, don't overbuild, because like, yes, like there's very clearly a market and there's very, very clearly a problem that you're trying to solve. So I get that, right? Looking at this really from the exhibitor's perspective, and so having done that in the past, like I understand the pain point you're trying to solve. The concern that I have, where it's just like, there is a reason sort of like why you build. So like, when I think about MVP, it's not like minimal viable product, it's minimal valuable product, right? So what does that look like? I tend to find a lot of founders tend to overbuild, and they realize like, well, wait a minute, we think we were building for this customer base, but a lot of times it's actually maybe the wrong customer base, or maybe we're finding that's a subsegment, and so they need something completely different. And you spend all your money building this thing that nobody really else wants. So it's a very, very clear balance of like, how do you, knowing that there's the market, and are you building the right thing for them, and how useful is it for them? Like, just a lot of times you don't know until you build it, but you don't want to overbuild. So there's a very clear balance sometimes. You sort of, that this is what makes it so hard. And so when I hear like 4 million, we do AI this, and I'm just like, do you really need all that stuff right now when you haven't really you haven't really gotten enough data points to sort of prove out that thesis yet? That's sort of just what goes through my head when I hear this.
Yeah, I would tend to agree on the product side, though. I appreciate your focus and your identifying of this issue. I would love to hear in the initial pitch, maybe a comment or two about the competitors that are out there, because this is, it's not a new concept, and everyone knows that managing conferences is an issue. And since we talked about Web Summit before, I mean, they have an app that they use for their own conference, and every conference now has an app. And so I would love to hear more detail, and I'm sure you have this, on the differentiation between what you guys are doing and what the individual conferences are doing, and what these other platforms that allow a conference to plug in and instantaneously build their app, how you guys are unique there.
Yeah, and the other thing I probably would have loved to hear as well too is just like, conferences are very big. So are there any specific industries where it's like, I'm making it like the fashion industry, or like the car industry, or the construction industry, where like, this is our first vector in, and here's why it makes sense, where like, as an initial sort of like, we either have really great network there, or some insight, or whatever it is, of just like, here's sort of like how we're starting, versus sort of like when we hear about conferences and stuff, where it's like, it's just so broad, right? Like, yeah. Or is it like the so some stuff like that would be also helpful to understand.
Yeah, I can probably briefly comment on what you said. So first of all, we are starting with the tech conferences, simply because, yes, we do have a lot of connections there. I've been in the industry for like more than 10 years already. All our team has more than 10 years of experience, like in general, within tech, and we know a lot of people there. And it's like, the audience is very open to all the new things, to try new things. So then in terms of the product and the MVP and like all the money, like MVP will be built with money or without money. It's like pretty clear right now. And we're starting with really, really small part, just to show that we can do things, just to start making traction. So it's going to be like just the list of like events, AI recommendations to these events, and like initial connection with other people within this tool. So yes, I think there was something else, but I just forgot. Yeah,
that was a great response. Good stuff. And a lot of these comments that Marvin and I are making are, I don't think we're looking for correction immediately. It's like, get in the headspace, and this is something that you'll continue to refine when you pitch yourself 1,000 more times, and you have both 10 seconds to do it, a minute to do it, and 10 minutes to do it. There's the different levels of resolution in there that you've got to be able to get it across. One of the most fun pitch events that I ever got to be a judge for, was the elevator pitch in an elevator that I did a few years ago, where we were the event was on the top floor of like a 30-story building, and you got in the elevator with a startup, and they had until the elevator could go down to the lobby and then go back up to the floor where the event was for them to pitch to you. And it was novel and fun, and you're kind of crammed in this little box with like a photographer there and a note taker there, and all these things. That was a good one. All right, let's see. We're almost out of time. Carlos, we definitely want to get to you. So let's hear what you're working on and what your finance plans are.
Yes, I'm working on an idea targeting media entertainment companies. And we know that media entertainment companies have some challenges engaging their audience, and especially younger audience. And at the same time, we see opportunity for monetization related to NFTs, related to that content. So we are trying to build a white label NFT marketplace targeting media entertainment companies with specific features that can create this utility for engagement with their content, like voting, like being able to see special content if they have a specific drop of NFTs. So that's what we are trying to explore.
And finance plans, what's your next step? What do you need to get to the next level?
Yeah, we are working on the financial model, but if I have to say to you, our draft number, it's around $250,000 to build the MVP. So to have engineers working on that, and of course we will not build it from scratch. We will have some partners because some building blocks. We want to use pieces that are in the market. As an example, wallets. We will not develop a wallet for that, but that's a rough idea of our funding requirements.
Also, it seems realistic. 250 is like a very reasonable number, I think, at the stage. I just think you're sort of stepping into the market at a very, how should I say, unique and challenging time right now.
Indeed.
Yeah, with the recent news, especially.
It's all red. It's just all red. It's painful.
Yeah.
It's painful.
Yeah. But at the same time, and I think, I'm not saying that it's easy and not a good time, but it's something that all the Web3 blockchain, I think they are here to stay. Maybe not the way they are around, but I foresee that if we are tough to raise the to go through the waves, maybe in the future there will be a different scenario.
Yeah, I mean, I'm personally super bullish on the space. I just think like my feeling is just sort of like this is kind of like the speaking like the old guy, like sort of like the 2001 moment of like crypto. Just like, wow, there have been some like really you know, people forget in 2001, remember, like 98% of the companies like disappeared. And so, you know, once you survive that, you're like, okay, I can survive anything. Just like, but a lot of people haven't been through it before. And I'm just like, I think we're going through that right now. It's just, I mean, you saw this, I saw this meme, this guy, this young kid, he's just like, I sold everything to buy the dip. This was back in January. Boy, he's not like,
you did not buy the dip.
He did not buy the dip. The dip's happening now. Like, I think he's just like, yeah, it's anyways, just like that has been going around. It's like, wow, I don't think people know how bad this could get. It's gonna be rough. It's gonna be rough for a period of time.
Yeah. And I want to hear from you, Jeffrey, since I learned that you work closer to Comcast and DC. Do you see these pain points that I described here, something that US media companies are trying also to address and to see the opportunity?
We talk about and you know, my context is within sports and entertainment within the Comcast bubble, right? We talk about NFTs a lot in the context of like NBA Top Shot, right? And sports moments NFT. We talk about back catalogs of a lot of the broadcasters and sports leagues. And then we also talk about rights for that, and who actually owns the rights, and what a company like Comcast, or through any of their partners, say NBC Sports, or the PGA Tour for golf, what they can and can't assign, and like if they assign an NFT to a particular sports moment, what that means for their ability to broadcast that moment in the future. We're thinking about a lot of these things right now. We're all also we talk about sports betting and gambling and gaming technologies and new ways of doing business there, and how that comes to play in different arenas. But I don't want to mention any more specifics, but suffice to say, we're thinking about it. We're out of time, guys. Thank you so much. I tweeted, sorry, I chatted in the Zoom chat my LinkedIn. Martin, if you're okay with it, if you want to put your LinkedIn link in there so people can connect with us and everything. And we'll look forward to staying connected. Thank you so much for your time and attention, and awesome questions and discussion topics. And we really sincerely appreciate it. Yeah, Martin, if you have anything to say, go for it. And Igor, back to you.
Yeah, no, thank you for having us. And thanks for moderating, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I think that played out pretty well. And we guys have another session like that coming up for the other cohorts, right? So I think that was a great session and a great format. Great job, Marvin, and great job, Jeffrey. Thank you, guys. Really appreciate it.
Anytime.
Yeah. All right. I just have a couple of organizational announcements as of I literally need like 1 minute, and we are good to go. Let me just quickly walk you through them, and we call it a day. So first, once again, I would like to thank our amazing speakers today, Marvin, Jeffrey. And as the next steps, please fill in the feedback form on today's session on metrics. Please fill in submit the answers to the knowledge check before 4 p.m. on Saturday, May 14th. And our next bootcamp will be with Alex Fellman, who is founder and CEO of Startup 42 Media, on fundraising and ownership. So it's going to be exactly in 1 week, same time. Please note, same time. So as we all agreed on the previous session, we move all the sessions 1 hour earlier. And please watch the webinar videos on the fundraising and ownership, and submit your questions if you have them. That's it from my side. Thank you all, and see you in a week. Have a wonderful weekend ahead. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.
Marvin. Thanks, Carlos, Lisa, Sianda, Martin. Bye-bye.